All right, let's get right into it. So, picture a blockchain that doesn't just process transactions, but actually leaves a zero carbon footprint on the planet. I know, it sounds a little bit like science fiction, right? But believe it or not, it's happening right now. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how crypto is finally meeting sustainability.
So this is the big one, the question that's been hanging over the entire industry for years. We've all heard the stories about crypto's massive energy use. So can it really be green? It's a totally fair question, and it gets right to the heart of this huge debate. But you know what? The answer is way more interesting than you might think, and it's pointing toward a surprisingly green future.
And this, right here, illustrates everything perfectly. You see that huge red bar? That is the traditional proof-of-work model. It's like this global race where millions of super powerful computers are all competing 24/7, burning an incredible amount of energy. But now, look at that tiny little green bar next to it. That's proof of stake. The difference in energy use is just staggering. This is the technological leap that makes all of this possible.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. We hear the term carbon neutral thrown around all the time, but what does it actually mean when you apply it to a blockchain? How do you really balance the scales for a digital network?
Well, at its core, it's pretty simple. Carbon neutral just means that a network's total carbon emissions are either completely offset or just eliminated altogether. The goal, the bottom line, is achieving a net zero impact. Now, this doesn't mean it produces zero emissions from the get-go. It's all about making sure that the final balance sheet with the atmosphere adds up to zero.
So here's how that balancing act works in the real world. On one side, you've got the emissions that are generated just by running the network. And on the other side, the network actively invests in projects. We're talking things like planting massive forests or funding new solar farms that remove that exact same amount of carbon from the atmosphere. It's a powerful equation. What you put in, you take out. The result? Net zero.
Okay, so we've got the what. Now let's talk about the how. This isn't just some vague promise. There's actually a clear playbook, a strategy that these networks are following to get this done. Let's break it down.
It really comes down to these 4 key steps. First, and this is the big one, is adopting proof of stake. Then, a lot of networks push their validators to use renewable energy sources like solar or wind. Third, to cover what's left, they purchase carbon offsets. And finally, and this is so critical, they ensure total transparency through public reports and audits, so we all know it isn't just greenwashing.
And the impact of that very first step, just switching to proof of stake, is almost hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about a reduction in energy consumption of up to 99.9%. Just let that sink in for a second. That is not a small improvement, it's a fundamental, industry-defining game changer.
All right, enough with the theory. Let's look at how this is all working in the real world. Because this isn't just a concept anymore. There are major blockchain projects that are already fully carbon neutral. So let's meet some of these pioneers leading the charge.
First up, we have Near Protocol. And what they're doing is really impressive. They don't just look at today's emissions, they actually went back in time, calculated and offset their entire historical carbon footprint since day one. And then they prove it with public reports. That level of transparency builds a massive amount of trust.
Next up, Algorand. Their approach is all about making a global impact. They fund a whole portfolio of climate-positive initiatives all around the world. So by putting resources into these external projects, they effectively cancel out the carbon footprint of their entire network. The whole ecosystem becomes carbon neutral from the ground up.
And then you've got Tezos, which uses this really smart 2-part formula. First, they start with an incredibly efficient proof-of-stake model, which keeps their initial footprint tiny to begin with. Then, for whatever's left, they use verified carbon offsets to neutralize it. It's a clean, simple equation, and seeing projects like this proves this is a real movement, not just some niche trend.
So, we've seen the how, but now let's talk about the why. Why does all of this matter so much? Because it's about way more than just being good for the planet. This shift actually has huge implications for the future adoption and even the value of crypto itself.
So, what's driving this big push? A huge part of it is the massive global trend of ESG investing. That stands for environmental, social, and governance. Billions of dollars from ESG funds, plus eco-conscious users and big institutions are all actively looking for sustainable projects to back. All of a sudden, being green isn't just a nice-to-have. It's become a powerful magnet for serious capital and adoption.
And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway here.
The projects that are figuring this out, they're the ones building the future of this industry. Being sustainable isn't at odds with being profitable anymore. In fact, the two are becoming totally intertwined. This right here is the formula for creating real, long-term value and trust in Web3.
So look, we've seen clear proof that entire blockchains can evolve, they can become responsible and sustainable, but that leaves one enormous, flashing question on the table. What about the single biggest energy consumer of them all? Proof of work mining. Is there a path forward for it? Well, that's a question for next time.
This is just the beginning. Subscribe to Web3 Newswire for more videos on green crypto revolution.